Chapter 1. The Trash Guide and the Waste Cub. The mud was cold. That was Suhi's first conscious thought. The second was that something was pressing against his bladder from the inside. And the third, something sharp and metallic lingered at the back of his throat, the phantom taste of apocalypse dust and recycled air. He opened his eyes. Above him, a gray sky stretched between cracked eaves. Not the vaulted metal ceilings of Shelter 9. Not the flickering fluorescent lights of the Guide Corps barracks. Just sky. Open, endless, damp-smelling sky. Rain had fallen recently. The earth beneath him was soft and cold, seeping through thin fabric into his skin. Interesting, he thought. Then the memories hit. They came not like a flood, but like a knife, precise, painful, and deeply irritating. Suhi, no, the other Suhi, had been a disaster. A disgraced guide of the Feng Empire, cast out from the noble household for being defective. His spiritual sea was supposedly too weak to stabilize any sentinel worth the name. His cultivation was stagnant. His personality, if the memories were accurate, had been a delightful cocktail of desperation, jealousy, and poor life choices. The worst of those choices was currently kicking him from the inside. So he looked down. His robes were torn, stained, and barely covering a very obvious 5-month pregnancy. His hand drifted to his belly, round, firm, undeniably occupied, and he felt a tiny pulse of mental energy brush against his own. A cub, half sentinel, half guide. In this world, that made it a waste, an abomination, something to be discarded. In the post-apocalyptic hellscape Suhi had crawled out of, it made the child a tandem, the rarest, most powerful class of being in existence, capable of both destruction and salvation in equal measure. "Oh, little bun," Suhi murmured, patting his stomach. "We hit the jackpot." He sat up slowly, wincing as his spine protested. The courtyard, if it could be called that, was a ruin. Crumbling walls, weeds pushing through cracked stone, a single dead tree leaning against a collapsed pavilion. At the center stood a small building that might once have been a servant's quarters. Now it was just sad. This was where the original Su, he had been exiled after his shameful pregnancy, was discovered. The Duke, Feng Shiyan, the male lead of the novel Su he had read during a particularly boring night shift, had washed his hands of the affair. A single night of drug passion had produced a child, and the Duke wanted nothing to do with either parent. Good, Suhi thought, brushing mud from his sleeves. The Duke can stay far away. I didn't transmigrate into a book just to deal with a brooding male lead's emotional constipation. He'd read The Starless Duke exactly once, during a 12-hour guide shift when the apocalypse had been quiet and boredom had been the real enemy. The story was standard fare. A cold, powerful sentinel Duke, a curse that was slowly destroying his mind, a pure-hearted female guide who saved him with her love. The original Su, he had been a minor villain. The desperate Omega who drugged the Duke, got pregnant, and was thrown away like garbage. He died off-page, alone and despised, and no one mourned him. Well, that wasn't going to be Suhi's story. He stretched, feeling the pull in his lower back, and smiled. The apocalypse had taught him many things. How to purify water with spiritual energy, how to fight off feral sentinels with nothing but a kitchen knife, and most importantly, how to be gloriously, unapologetically lazy. For 10 years, Suhi had been a top-tier guide, the best of the best. He'd healed hundreds of sentinels, walked into mental seas so shattered they'd driven lesser guides mad, and come out smiling every time. And he'd hated every second of it. The constant demand, the desperate pleas, the way everyone saw him as a tool rather than a person. Now he was a trash guide in a peaceful, pre-apocalyptic world. No one expected anything from him. No one wanted him. He could cook, nap, and raise his little tandem cub in perfect obscurity. Best transmigration ever, he announced to the empty courtyard. A small, hesitant knock came from a gate. Suhi turned. A thin man in steward's robes stood there, his face a masterpiece of condescension barely masked as politeness. He held a small cloth bag that clinked with what sounded like 3 copper coins. "Young Master Su," the steward said, not quite bowing. I've been sent by the Duke's household to inform you of a change in circumstances. Let me guess, Sui said. The allowance is cut. The steward's eye twitched. The Duke's finances have been reallocated. You will need to fend for yourself from now on. This is your final severance. He tossed the bag. It landed at Suhi's feet with a pitiful clink. 3 copper coins. Enough for a single bowl of rice, if he was frugal. Also, the steward added, turning to leave, the kitchen privileges you were granted have been revoked. The Duke's chef does not wish to be contaminated by your presence. So he watched him go. Then he bent down, slowly, carefully, because 5 months pregnant was no joke, and picked up the bag of coins. 3 coppers. No kitchen. A dilapidated house. A child on the way. He smiled. The steward had made a critical error. He'd said the Duke's kitchen was off limits. He hadn't said anything about the small, abandoned kitchen attached to Suhi's own quarters. 20 minutes later, Suhi stood in front of a cramped, dust-covered cooking space. The stove was brick, traditional, with a chimney that vented through the roof. The pots were chipped but usable. The knives were dull but present. And in a locked cabinet in the corner, clearly forgotten by the previous occupants, was a small store of ingredients. Stale rice, moldy vegetables, a lump of rancid lard, salt, a single dried chili. So he cracked his knuckles. Challenge accepted. Cooking in the apocalypse had been a matter of survival. The feral sentinels, the unstable spiritual rifts, the constant threat of starvation. Every meal had been a battle. But Suhi had learned that even the worst ingredients could become something nourishing if you understood their essence. He picked through the vegetables, discarding the truly rotten parts and salvaging what remained. A handful of wilted greens, half an onion, sprouting but still edible, a few cloves of garlic, soft but not yet spoiled. The rice he washed 3 times in the well water, watching the cloudiness fade to clear. He didn't have proper fuel for the stove, but he didn't need it. He pressed his palm to the brick and let a tiny thread of his guide energy seep out. Not enough to heal, just enough to warm. In the apocalypse, guides had learned to manipulate thermal energy as a secondary skill. It was inefficient and exhausting, but for a single pot of congee, manageable. The rice went into the pot with water. The vegetables were chopped fine. His knife skills were still sharp, muscle memory from 1,000 meals cooked in bombed-out buildings and underground bunkers. The lard he rendered slowly, coaxing out its remaining flavor, then used it to sauté the garlic and chili until the small kitchen filled with a scent that made his eyes water and his stomach growl. The cub kicked. Hard. Patience, Sui murmured, stirring the congee. Good things take time. He added the vegetables, a pinch of salt, the rest of the garlic, raw for brightness. The dried chili crumbled between his fingers, releasing a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. When it was done, the congee was simple, almost pitifully so, but it was hot, and it was his, and the first spoonful made the cub do a happy somersault against his ribs. Sui sat on a broken stool in the courtyard, the bowl cradled in his hands, and let himself feel something he hadn't felt in years. Contentment. No alarms. No desperate sentinels pounding on his door. No superiors demanding he push himself past exhaustion to heal one more soldier, one more child, one more anyone. Just congee. Just silence. Just the soft pulse of his cub's mental energy, warm and curious and alive. He was halfway through the bowl when he felt it. A wave of spiritual noise, crashing against the edges of his perception. Not directed at him. He was too insignificant for that, but close. Too close. It came from Main Estate, a massive compound of dark wood and gray stone that loomed at the other end of the property. A sentinel was losing control. Sui had felt this 1,000 times. The sharp, jagged edges of a mental sea shattering. The screams, not physical, but spiritual, that tore through the air like broken glass. The desperation of a mind eating itself alive. In the apocalypse, he would have run toward it. That had been his job, his curse. Here he had a choice. He took another bite of congee. The noise intensified. A roar echoed from the estate. Not human, not quite animal. Something in between. Something broken. The cub flinched inside him, and Sui's hand instinctively went to his belly. "Shoo," he whispered. "It's far away. We're safe." He wasn't sure if he was lying. To soothe the cub, he began to hum. It was an old guide trick, a low, steady frequency that wrapped around a sentinel's raging mental sea like a blanket. It didn't heal, not really, but it created a buffer. A moment of calm in the storm. He hummed while he ate. He hummed while he washed the bowl in the well water. He hummed while he waddled back to his sad little bed and lay down, one hand on his belly, eyes closed. The noise from the estate faded just a little. Not because of him. He was too far away, too weak, too nothing in this world's eyes. But something in the air shifted, something that smelled like rice and garlic and warmth. Sui fell asleep smiling. 3 miles away, in a tower of dark stone, Duke Fengshurin knelt on a floor soaked with his own blood. His mental sea was a graveyard. Once, it had been a vast ocean, calm and deep, capable of drowning armies. Now it was shards, glass-like fragments of memory and sensation, each one cutting him from the inside. His senses, his cursed senses, amplified everything to the point of agony. The scratch of his own breath was thunder. The beat of his heart was a war drum. The distant murmur of the servants was a screaming crowd. He hadn't slept in weeks. He hadn't eaten in days. His body was a prison, and his mind was the torturer. And then something, a scent, faint, barely there, carried on a wind that should have been meaningless. But Fengshurin's senses were not normal. Even cursed, even dying, he could smell the ghost of it. Rice, garlic, chili, and underneath, something else. Something that made his shattered mental sea pause. A hum, low and steady like a heartbeat, like a lullaby, like the first quiet moment after a storm. Fengshurin's head lifted. His eyes, red-rimmed, bloodshot, barely human, turned toward the window, toward the east, toward the crumbling courtyard where a trash guide was sleeping off a bowl of congee. Food, he thought. And then, because he had not thought clearly in months, he stood up. His legs nearly gave out. His guards, stationed outside the door, flinched at the sound of his movement. No one dared enter. No one dared speak to him. He was a beast in a cage, and everyone knew that beast bit. But the beast was moving. Fengshurin walked. Through the tower, down the spiral stairs, past the guards who pressed themselves against the walls to avoid his gaze. Through the main estate, where servants fled at the sight of him. Through the gardens, dead and gray from his leaking spiritual pressure. Toward the east, toward the scent, toward the hum. He didn't know what he would find. He didn't care. For the first time in 2 years, something other than pain existed in his world. The courtyard gate was broken. He stepped through it without registering the decay, the weeds, the collapsed pavilion. His eyes found the small building, the dark stove, the empty bowl on the step, and the body on the bed inside. A young man, no, a pregnant guide, his spiritual signature weak and muddy, lay curled on his side, one hand on his belly, lips parted in sleep. His robes were torn. His hair was a mess. His face was soft and unguarded and utterly ordinary. Fengshurin stopped in the doorway. The hum was coming from him. Even in sleep, his guide energy pulsed in that low, steady rhythm. And the scent, the rice, the garlic, the impossible warmth, clung to his skin like a second layer. The Duke did not understand what was happening. He only knew that the screaming in his head had dimmed to a whisper. He sat down on the floor, cross-legged like a child, and he watched the trash guide sleep. The cub kicked. The guide mumbled something about scallions. And Fengshurin, the deadliest sentinel in the empire, did not move for the rest of the night. Chapter 2. The Duke Who Lost His Taste. Dawn came slowly, filtering through the cracked window shutters in pale gold stripes. Suhi woke to 2 things: the familiar weight of his hand on his belly and an unfamiliar weight of presence in his room. His eyes snapped open. The Duke was still there. Fengshurin sat cross-legged on the dirt floor, exactly where he'd been when Suhi fell asleep. His robes were black silk, torn at the sleeves, and stained with something dark that might have been blood. His hair, long, ink-black, usually immaculate, hung in tangled ropes around a face that looked like it had been carved from marble and then dropped down a flight of stairs. He was beautiful, The novel hadn't lied about that. High cheekbones, a sharp jaw, lips that were made for frowning. But the beauty was ruined by the hollows under his eyes, the cracked veins visible at his temples, the way his fingers twitched against his knees as if fighting off invisible attackers. He was also staring at Soo-hee like a starving wolf who just found a wounded rabbit. "Good morning," Soo-hee said flatly. The Duke didn't respond. His eyes, dark gray, almost silver in the dawn light, flickered to the empty bowl on the step, then back to Soo-hee. His throat moved. A swallow. A need so naked it was almost obscene. Ah, Soo-hee thought. I see. In the apocalypse, he'd seen this look 100 times. It was the look of a sentinel on the edge of berserker collapse, grasping at anything that might pull them back from the brink. The difference was that those sentinels had been feral, mindless, incapable of restraint. This one was holding himself together by what looked like sheer force of will. "You're in my house," Soo-hee said. The Duke's jaw tightened. A muscle jumped in his cheek. Still, no words. "I'm going to assume you're not here to murder me," Soo-hee continued, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. The movement made his belly shift, and he caught the Duke's gaze dropping to the curve of it for just a moment. "If you were, you'd have done it already. So, why are you here?" The Duke's lips parted, closed. His voice, when it came, was a ruin, hoarse from disuse, scraped raw by screaming. What was that? What was what? The smell. The Duke's hands clenched into fists on his knees. The sound. Last night. What was that? So he considered lying. Considered playing dumb. Considered the easy path, the lazy path, the path that led to the Duke leaving him alone forever. Then he looked at the man's eyes, at the cracks spreading through his irises like broken ice, at the way his entire body trembled with the effort of not lunging. He's dying, Soo-hee realized. The curse in the novel, it's killing him faster than I thought. The original story had given Feng Shuiyan 3 years to live after the curse took root. By the timeline Soo-hee could piece together from the original's memories, the Duke should have had at least 18 months left. But the cracks in his spiritual veins told a different story. 6 months, maybe less. Unless something changed. Not my problem, Soo-hee told himself firmly. Not my circus. Not my dying sentinel. The cub kicked. Hard. Right against his ribs, in a way that felt almost pointed. Traitor, Soo-hee thought at it. Aloud, he said, "It was congee. Rice, vegetables, garlic, chili. Nothing special." The Duke's eyes blazed. Liar. Excuse me. You're lying. Feng Shuiyan rose to his feet in a single, fluid motion that should have been impossible given how wrecked he looked. He took a step forward, then another. Soo-hee's instincts screamed at him to retreat, but his body was slow and pregnant, and frankly too tired for this nonsense. So he stayed put. The Duke stopped inches away, close enough that Soo-hee could smell him. Not blood and madness, but something underneath. Sandalwood. Rain. Old grief. "I haven't tasted anything in 2 years," Feng Shuiyan said, each word a shard of glass. "I haven't smelled anything in 2 years. The curse destroyed my senses. I eat ash. I drink water. Everything is nothing." His voice cracked on the last word. A fissure in the marble facade. "Last night," he continued, quieter now, "I smelled garlic. I tasted salt. For 3 seconds, I was human again." His hand rose, not to grab, not to threaten, but to hover in the air between them, trembling. "Tell me it was you. Tell me how you did it, and I will give you anything you want." So he looked at the offered hand, at the Duke's ruined eyes, at the desperate, starving thing hiding behind the mask of nobility. He thought about his 3 copper coins, his ruined courtyard, his unwanted pregnancy, and his trash guide status. He thought about the apocalypse, and how he'd sworn never to be anyone's tool again. "No," he said. The Duke froze. "I said no." So he pushed himself off the bed, using his belly to nudge the Duke back a step. "I don't want your money. I don't want your gratitude. I don't want to be your personal healer or your pet chef or whatever you're about to offer me. What I want is to be left alone." He waddled past the Duke, out the door, into the courtyard. The morning air was cool and damp, and his back ached, and he really needed to pee. "What I have," he called over his shoulder, "is 1 bowl of leftover congee. It's cold now. It won't taste like anything. Go home, Duke. Forget you came here. He disappeared behind the broken wall to relieve himself. When he came back, the Duke was sitting on the step where the bowl had been. The bowl was empty. Feng Shuyan looked up at him, and for the first time, Suhi saw something other than madness in his eyes. Something smaller, more fragile. Hope, Suhi realized. Damn it. It was cold, the Duke said quietly. It still tasted like something. Not much. A ghost of flavor. But enough. He held out the empty bowl. His hands were steady now. I will wash the vegetables, he said. Suhi blinked. What? You said you wanted to be left alone. I'm not offering to take that from you. The Duke's voice was still rough, but there was something almost rational underneath it now. I am offering to be useful. I will wash your vegetables. I will chop your ingredients. I will stoke your fire. I will do whatever you require in exchange for a seat at my table, Suhi finished. The Duke's throat moved. A single bite. A single taste. That is all I ask. Suhi stared at him, at the most powerful man in the empire, kneeling on his broken step, offering to wash vegetables like a scullery maid. The cub kicked. The morning light caught the Duke's silver-gray eyes and made them look almost warm. This is a terrible idea, Suhi thought. He's going to be insufferable. He's going to attract attention. He's going to ruin my peaceful retirement. But the congee from last night had been made with stale rice and moldy vegetables. If he was going to feed himself and the cub properly, he needed better ingredients. And the Duke's estate had the best pantry in the empire. Fine, Suhi said. You can wash the vegetables, but you follow my rules. The Duke nodded, grave as a soldier accepting orders. Rule 1, Suhi said. You do not speak to me about feelings. I don't want to hear about your tragic past, your emotional wounds, or your deep-seated need for connection. You are here to cook. That's it. Agreed. Rule 2. You do not kill anyone within 10 feet of my stove. If you must execute someone, take it outside. I don't want blood in the food. A pause. Then the ghost of something that might have been a smile. Agreed. Rule 3. So he put his hand on his belly, where the cub was doing somersaults of what felt like approval. If you waste food, you're banned forever. I don't care if it's burned, spoiled, or poisoned. You eat what you're given, and you're grateful for it. The Duke's expression shifted. Something soft, something surprised, flickered across his ruined face. Agreed, he said again, and this time the word sounded like a vow. Suhi nodded. Good. Now go away. I need a nap before I can think about lunch. He turned and waddled back to his bed, fully expecting the Duke to leave. The man had his answer. He had his agreement. There was no reason for him to stay. When Suhi woke up 2 hours later, Feng Shuyan was still there, sitting on the same spot on the floor, legs crossed, eyes closed. He looked less like a starving wolf now and more like a large, dangerous dog who had decided this was his new home. The cub kicked happily. Suhi sighed. You're still here. I washed the vegetables, the Duke said, not opening his eyes. There was some in your cabinet. They were mostly rotten. I took the liberty of sending a servant to the estate for fresh ones. You sent a servant? I thought you wanted to keep this secret. I didn't say that. The Duke opened his eyes. They were calmer now. Still cracked, still wounded, but no longer screaming. I said I wanted to taste again. I don't care who knows. So he pinched the bridge of his nose. You're going to be a problem, aren't you? Almost certainly. And you're not going to leave. The Duke considered this. No. Even if I tell you to, that would violate Rule 3. You haven't fed me yet. I can't leave until I've eaten. Suhi stared at him. The Duke stared back, utterly serious, utterly immovable. This, Suhi thought, is how I end up with a Duke-shaped shadow. Aloud, he said, fine. Lunch is in 2 hours. You're on onion duty. The Duke rose. He crossed to the small kitchen, rolled up his silk sleeves, ruining a robe worth more than Suhi's entire life, and picked up a knife. His hands, when he began to chop, were steady as a surgeon's. Precise. Efficient. The onions fell into perfect, even pieces, and the Duke's cursed senses didn't even make him cry. So he watched from the doorway, one hand on his belly, and wondered if he'd just made the best or worst decision of his life. The cub kicked. Definitely the best, the kick seemed to say. He smells like Dad. Suhi groaned. Don't start. Chapter 3. the overqualified sous chef. The first week was chaos. Not the dramatic kind. No assassins, no political intrigue, no near-death experiences. Just the slow, grinding chaos of trying to cook in a ruined kitchen with a duke who had never chopped an onion in his life and a pregnant guide who refused to do anything that required standing for more than 20 minutes at a time. Feng Shuyan, it turned out, was terrifyingly competent. He learned recipes after seeing them once. His knife skills improved at an inhuman rate. Within 3 days, he was deboning a chicken faster than Suhi could, and with more precision. He could light the stove with a single spark of spiritual energy, control the flame temperature by instinct, and keep a pot at a perfect simmer without looking at it. He was objectively the best sous chef Su he had ever had. Suhi hated it. "You're hovering," he said on the 4th day, as the Duke stood 2 inches behind him, watching him season a broth. "I'm learning. You're breathing on my neck. You're shorter than me. It's unavoidable." Suhi elbowed him in the ribs. The Duke didn't move. He also didn't react to the elbow, which was frankly insulting. Suhi had put some weight behind it. "You're supposed to be washing vegetables," Suhi said. "The vegetables are washed. Then chop the garlic. The garlic is chopped. Then," Suhi waved a hand vaguely, "go do something Duke-like. Brood. Threaten someone. Stare moodily out a window." The Duke's lips twitched. "I could do that here." "You absolutely cannot." But the Duke stayed. He always stayed. He sat on a low stool in the corner of the kitchen, watching Suhi move from stove to counter to pantry, and his eyes followed every gesture like a starving man watching a feast being prepared. The cub loved it. Every time the Duke's gaze landed on Suhi's belly, the little one would kick and roll and send out tiny pulses of happy mental energy. It was embarrassing. It was also, Suhi had to admit, kind of cute. Not that he would ever say that out loud. On the 5th day, the Duke's servants began arriving. Not in force. Feng Shuyan was too smart for that. They came one by one, bearing gifts that were framed as apologies. A basket of fresh eggs. A side of cured ham. A crate of winter vegetables so perfect they looked painted. Each gift was delivered with a low bow and a murmured, "His Grace sends his regrets for the poor condition of your kitchen." Suhi accepted every gift. He did not thank the Duke. He did not acknowledge the obvious ploy. But that night, he made an extra portion of braised pork and left it on the Duke's stool. The Duke ate it in silence. His eyes, when he looked up, were almost soft. "Don't," Suhi said. "I just had extra. It would have gone to waste." "You said not to waste food." "I did. So you ate it. That's the end of it." The Duke nodded. But he kept looking at Suhi like he was something precious, and that was a problem. On the 7th day, the first assassin came. Suhi was napping. This was not unusual. The cub was growing, and growing required energy, and energy required naps. He had a routine now. Wake, eat, nap, cook lunch, nap, cook dinner, sleep. It was glorious. He was in the middle of a particularly good dream about a buffet when the sound of breaking would jerk him awake. The courtyard gate had been smashed inward. 3 figures in black stood amidst the splinters, their faces masked, their blades drawn. Spiritual energy crackled around them. Low-level sentinels, probably mercenaries, definitely not smart enough to be afraid. "Suhi," the lead one said, "by order of the Empress Dowager, you are to be eliminated. Your bastard child cannot be allowed to live." Suhi blinked again. "Can this wait?" he said. "I was having a good dream." The assassins exchanged confused glances. Then the lead one shrugged and lunged. He made it 3 steps before Feng Shuyan appeared. The Duke moved like water, silent, fluid, inevitable. He stepped between Suhi and the assassins without seeming to hurry. His hand rose. His fingers closed around the lead assassin's blade. The metal shattered. "What?" Feng Shuyan said, his voice flat and cold as a winter lake. "Did you say about my child?" The assassin's eyes went wide. Your Grace, we didn't know. You didn't know that the guide carrying my cub was under my protection?" The Duke tilted his head. "You didn't know that threatening his life was threatening mine." He moved again, so he didn't see the strike. Neither did the assassins. One moment they were standing, the next they were on the ground, unconscious, their blades scattered around them like fallen leaves. Feng Shuyan turned. His eyes were still cold, but his voice, when he spoke to Su He, was gentle. Are you hurt? I'm fine. Su He was staring at the unconscious bodies. You didn't kill them. They didn't touch you. Death would have been wasteful. The Duke knelt and began binding the assassin's wrists with strips torn from his own sleeve. I'll have him questioned. The Empress Dowager overreached. You can't just... Su He stopped. Took a breath. You're going to start a war. Over me. Over this. The Duke looked up. His gray eyes met Su He's, and there was something in them that made Su He's breath catch. You are the mother of my child, Feng Shuyan said. You are the only person who has ever made me feel human. If that means war, then war it is. That's not. Su He ran a hand through his hair. I didn't ask for this. I just wanted to cook. Then cook. The Duke rose, brushing dust from his knees. I'll handle the rest. He picked up the unconscious assassins, one under each arm, like they weighed nothing, and carried them out of the courtyard. Su He stood in the doorway, one hand on his belly, and watched him go. The cub kicked. He's so strong, the kick seemed to say, and he smells like Dad. He's trouble, Su He muttered. And so are you. But he went back to the kitchen, and when the Duke returned an hour later, looking vaguely guilty about something, Su He handed him a bowl of leftover noodles without being asked. The Duke ate in silence. Su He pretended not to see the way his hands shook. Chapter 4. The Shattered Sentinel's Feast. The full moon came on the 15th day. Su He had been tracking it, not because he cared about lunar cycles, but because the Duke's condition worsened every night as the moon waxed. By the day before the full moon, Feng Shuyan's hands were shaking constantly. His eyes had developed a permanent red rim. He flinched at sounds Su He couldn't hear and smelled things that weren't there. On the afternoon of the full moon, he collapsed. Su He was stirring a pot of broth when he heard the crash. He turned. The Duke was on the kitchen floor, curled into a ball, his hands over his ears. His mouth was open in a silent scream. Feng Shuyan. Su He knelt beside him, slowly, because his belly made kneeling difficult. Hey, look at me. The Duke's eyes were open, but they weren't seeing. His mental sea was hemorrhaging. Su He could feel it now, the sharp edges of it cutting against his own calm waters. The curse was eating him alive. The noise, Feng Shuyan whispered. It's so loud. Everything is so loud. Su had seen this before. 100 times, 1,000 times in the apocalypse. Sentinels whose senses had become weapons turned against them. Minds drowning in input. Souls crumbling under the weight of too much world. He had healed them. Every single one. And every time, it had cost him pieces of himself. Not again, he thought. I promised myself. No more. The Duke's hand found his ankle. Squeezed. Not hard. He didn't have the strength for hard. Just held on. Like Su, he was the only solid thing in a world of glass. The cub kicked. Sharp. Demanding. Help him, the kick said. He's ours. So he closed his eyes. Took a breath. Open them. Move, he said. I need the stove. The Duke didn't move. Couldn't move. So Su He crawled around him, pulling ingredients from the cabinets with hands that were steadier than he felt. 7 dishes. That was what it would take. A full mental sea banquet, like the ones the old guides used to make in the apocalypse. Each dish designed to heal a different layer of a sentinel's shattered mind. He hadn't made one in years. He wasn't sure he remembered how. You remember, the cub whispered in his mind. You remember everything. First dish, lotus seed soup. Su He started with the simplest thing. Lotus seeds, soaked overnight. Rock sugar. A pinch of salt. Water from the well. Filtered through his spiritual energy until it hummed with calm. He simmered it slowly, stirring with his left hand while his right rested on his belly. The cub's energy pulsed in time with his heartbeat, a steady rhythm that grounded him. The lotus seed softened. The water turned golden. The scent that rose from the pot was sweet and clean, like rain on dry earth. He ladled a small bowl and carried it to the Duke. Drink, he said. Feng Shuyan's hands were shaking too hard to hold the bowl. So Su He knelt beside him, tipped the bowl to his lips, and watched him swallow. The effect was immediate. Not healing, not yet, but a lessening. The sharp edges of the Duke's mental sea dulled. The screaming in his eyes faded to a whimper. What? The Duke breathed. "Shut up and drink," Sui said. "I have 6 more dishes to make." Second dish, steamed fish with ginger. The Duke's sense of smell was the first thing the curse had destroyed. Without it, he couldn't ground himself, couldn't find the anchor that kept Sentinel sane. Ginger was the key. Sharp, bright, alive. Sui steamed a fresh river fish, one of the gifts from the Duke's estate, with slivers of ginger tucked into every cut. The steam carried the scent through the kitchen, through the courtyard, through the cracks in the Duke's broken senses. When Sui offered him a bite, Feng Shuyan's eyes widened. "I can smell it," he whispered. "I can smell it." "Eat," Sui said. "You're not done yet." Third dish, shattered glass noodles. This one was symbolic. Sui didn't believe in symbolism. He believed in practical effects. But the old guides had understood something that modern healers had forgotten. The mind responded to metaphor. He made the noodles by hand, stretching and folding the dough until it was thin as paper. Then he cut it into jagged shards, each piece a different size, a different shape. He tossed them a hot wok with soy sauce, vinegar, and a touch of sugar. When the Duke ate them, his mental sea didn't heal. But the shards, the broken pieces of his mind, began to shift, rearranging themselves, finding new configurations. The screaming stopped. Fourth dish, sweet osmanthus jelly. Sentinel madness always started with the loss of sweetness. Not just taste, emotion. The ability to feel joy, contentment, love. The curse had stripped Feng Shuyan of everything soft. Osmanthus flowers were rare in this season, but the Duke's greenhouse had them. Sui had found them during his 3rd day of snooping through the estate stores. He'd been saving them for something special. He brewed the flowers into a tea, sweetened it with honey, and set it with agar into a trembling golden jelly. When he spooned it into the Duke's mouth, Feng Shuyan made a sound that wasn't quite a sob. "Sweet," he said, like the word was foreign. "It's sweet." Sui looked away. His eyes were stinging, and that was unacceptable. "3 more," he said. "You can cry later." Fifth dish, bitter melon stir-fry. The Duke needed to remember pain. Not the overwhelming, drowning pain of the curse, the useful pain. The kind that reminded you that you were alive, that you could fight, that you had survived worse. Sui hated bitter melon. He always had. But he chopped it fine, stir-fried it with black beans and garlic, and watched the Duke eat every bite without flinching. "You don't like it," Feng Shuyan observed. "It's not for me. Why are you doing this?" The Duke's voice was steadier now. His hands had stopped shaking. His eyes were still cracked, but the cracks were filling with something gold. "You said you didn't want to heal me. You said you wanted to be left alone." Sui shrugged. "The cub wanted you alive. Ask them." He pointed at his belly. The cub kicked, as if to confirm. The Duke's expression shifted. Something raw and wondering crossed his face. "Thank you," he said. "Shut up." 2 more dishes. Sixth dish, spicy mapo tofu. This was the dangerous one. The dish that could go wrong, that could push the Duke back into madness instead of pulling him out. Spice woke up the sentinel instincts, the fight-or-flight response, the part of the brain that had kept humanity alive in the apocalypse. But too much spice applied wrong could trigger a berserker episode. Sui measured each ingredient like a pharmacist. Fermented bean paste, ground pork, silken tofu, cut into cubes, Sichuan peppercorns, toasted and ground to a powder, and chili oil, his own recipe, aged for 3 months, hot enough to make his eyes water. He cooked it carefully, slowly, letting the flavors build layer by layer. When he tasted it, the heat bloomed across his tongue, followed by the numbing tingle of the peppercorns. Perfect. The Duke ate it without hesitation. His face flushed. Sweat beaded on his forehead. His breathing quickened. And then he laughed. It was a small sound. Rusty, unpracticed, barely there. But it was real. "That's..." Feng Shuyan touched his own lips, surprised. "That's spicy." "That's the point," Sui said, and he was smiling. He couldn't help it. 1 more. The most important one. 7th dish, rice porridge. So he went back to the beginning. Rice, washed 3 times. Water, filtered through his spiritual energy. A pinch of salt. That was all. He simmered it for an hour, stirring constantly, letting the grains break down into a smooth, creamy porridge. No vegetables, no meat, no spices. Just the basics. Just the thing that had started all of this. When it was done, he ladled it into a bowl and carried it to the Duke. "This is the first thing you tasted," Suhi said, "the night you came to my courtyard. Cold congee, made from stale rice and moldy vegetables. It wasn't good, but it was real." The Duke took the bowl. His hands were steady now. His eyes, when they met Suhi's, were clear. "I remember," he said. "I remember the taste. I remember thinking," he stopped, swallowed. "I remember thinking that I wanted to live." He ate the porridge in silence, and when he finished, he set the bowl down and reached for Suhi's hand. So he let him take it. The Duke's mental sea wasn't fixed. It would never be fixed. The curse had done too much damage. But it was organized now. The shards had become stepping stones. The ghosts had become memories. The screaming had become a quiet murmur, manageable, human. "Stay," Feng Shuyan whispered. So he looked at their joined hands, at the Duke's calm face, at the kitchen around them, warm and bright and smelling of a dozen different dishes. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "I'm too tired to move." The Duke's lips curved. A real smile, small but genuine. "Then sleep," he said. "I'll watch over you." So he wanted to argue. He wanted to say that he didn't need watching, that he was fine, that the Duke should go brood somewhere else. But his eyes were heavy, and the cub was warm, and the kitchen was quiet. He leaned against the Duke's shoulder and closed his eyes. When he woke up, he was in a bed that wasn't his. Silk sheets, warm furs, the scent of sandalwood and rain. And the Duke was kneeling beside the bed, holding his hand, watching him with eyes that were gray and gold and something new. Something like devotion. "I am yours to command," Feng Shuyan said quietly. "Or to chop onions for. Whichever you prefer." Sui stared at him, at the most powerful man in the empire, kneeling on the floor of his own bedroom, offering himself like a gift. "You're ridiculous," Suhi said. The Duke smiled. "Yes, and you're not leaving." "No, and you're going to be insufferable about this." "Almost certainly." So he pulled his hand free, turned over, and pressed his face into the pillow. "The kitchen," he mumbled. "I need to check on the broth." "The broth is fine. I turned it down to a simmer before I carried you here." So he went still. "You carried me? You were asleep." It seemed efficient. "You carried me through the estate?" The servants saw nothing. "I made sure of it." So he groaned into the pillow. The cub kicked, delighted. "He carried us," the kick seemed to say. "He's so strong. And he smells like Dad. We're never going to be rid of him, are we?" Suhi muttered. The cub kicked again, which Suhi chose to interpret as agreement. Chapter 5. The Politics of Stoves. Word spread faster than Suhi would have liked. Within a week of the full moon, everyone in the capital knew that the Mad Duke had been cured. Not healed. Suhi was careful to correct that misconception whenever he heard it, but stabilized. Feng Shuyan could walk through the estate without flinching at every sound. He could attend court without his senses driving him to violence. He could eat, and everyone wanted to know how. The rumors varied. Some said he was a hidden master of spiritual healing, a guide of unprecedented power who had disguised himself as trash. Others said he'd used forbidden arts, bargaining with demons to save the Duke. A few, the most accurate, and therefore the most dangerous, whispered that it was his cooking that had done the impossible. So he ignored all of it. He stayed in his kitchen, cooked his meals, and tried very hard not to think about the political storm brewing outside. But the storm came to him. The first sign was the visitors. Nobles who had never looked twice at the trash guide suddenly wanted to invite him to tea. Officials who had cut his allowance sent gifts of rare ingredients with fawning notes. Even the emperor's own steward appeared at the courtyard gate, bearing a summons to the palace. So he burned the summons in the stove. The emperor will not appreciate that, Feng Shuyan observed from his stool in the corner. The emperor can appreciate these nuts, Suhi said, gesturing at a bowl of roasted chestnuts. They're very good. He's not getting any. The Duke's lips twitched. You're aware that defying an imperial summons is treason. Then they can execute me. I'll be too busy napping to care. But Suhi wasn't stupid. He knew the attention was dangerous. The Empress Dowager had already tried to kill him once. The other noble houses would try soon enough. And the Duke, for all his power, couldn't protect him from everything. So Sui did what he always did when faced with a problem. He cooked. The charity kitchen. It started small. A pot of soup set out on the broken step of the courtyard gate. A sign, written in Sui-hee's messy handwriting, free. Take one. The first day, no one came. The second day, a single beggar woman took a bowl, looked at Sui-hee like he was insane, and scurried away. The third day, she came back with her children. By the end of the week, there was a line. So he didn't advertise. He didn't explain. He just cooked. Big pots of rice porridge, vegetable stew, simple noodles with broth. Nothing fancy. Nothing like the meals he made for the Duke. Just food. Real food. Made with care, given away for free. The people who came were the ones no one else wanted. Beggars, orphans, widows, the sick, the old. People who had been forgotten by the empire, who survived on scraps and pity. So he gave them bowls. He didn't ask for their stories. He didn't offer comfort. He just fed them. And something shifted. The people are calling it the Kitchen of Mercy, Feng Shuyan reported one evening, as he washed vegetables beside Sui-hee. They say the food heals more than hunger. They say it heals the heart. Sui-hee snorted. It's just soup. People get dramatic when they're hungry. It's not just soup. The Duke set down his knife. I watched you cook for a month. You put something into your food. Something that doesn't come from ingredients. Sui didn't answer. He couldn't explain it. Not in a way that would make sense to someone from this world. The old guides had called it essence. The spiritual energy of the cook, infused into the food through intention and care. In the apocalypse, it had been the difference between survival and starvation. Here was something new. Something that made the Duke's mental sea calm, and the beggar woman's children laugh, and the dying man at the end of the line open his eyes and ask for seconds. Maybe, Sui said finally, or maybe people just need to be reminded that someone cares whether they eat. The Duke was quiet for a long moment. Then he picked up his knife and went back to chopping. I care, he said, so quietly that Sui almost didn't hear it. Whether you eat, whether you sleep, whether you're happy. Sui's hand stilled on the pot he was scrubbing. Don't, he said. Why not? Because I'm not. Sui stopped. Took a breath. I'm not the person you think I am. I'm lazy. I'm selfish. I don't want to save anyone. I just want to cook and nap and raise my cub in peace. The Duke looked at him. His gray-gold eyes were steady. You fed a dying man today, he said. You didn't have to. No one asked you to. You saw him standing at the end of the line, too weak to hold his bowl, and you carried him to a seat and spooned soup into his mouth until he could swallow on his own. That's not. You healed me, the Duke continued. You said you didn't want to. You said it was the cub's idea. But you stayed. You made 7 dishes. You held my hand when I couldn't hold the bowl. You didn't leave. Sui's throat was tight. He looked away. I'm not a good person, he said. You're the best person I know, Feng Shuyan replied. And I've known emperors. The kitchen was quiet. The cub kicked, soft and questioning. Is he right? The kick seemed to ask. Are you good? Sui didn't have an answer. He wasn't sure he wanted one. The assassination attempt came 3 days later. Sui was alone in the kitchen. The Duke had been called to court for an emergency session, something about border tensions and grain shipments. The cub was quiet, dozing against his ribs. The soup was simmering. He heard the window break half a second before the needle flew. It was small, delicate, poison, probably the kind of thing assassins used when they wanted a death that looked natural. It was aimed at his belly. Sui moved. Not fast. He was 5 months pregnant. Fast wasn't an option. But he'd spent 10 years dodging feral sentinels in the apocalypse. He knew how to throw himself sideways, how to make himself a smaller target, how to take a hit somewhere that wouldn't kill him. The needle hit his shoulder instead of his stomach. The poison burned. Sui gasped, stumbled, caught himself on the counter. His vision blurred at the edges. The assassin, a woman in gray, her face hidden behind a cloth mask, lunged again. And Feng Shuyan was there. He came through the door like a storm. No warning, no sound, just sudden and violent and furious. His hand caught the assassin's wrist. His other hand struck her throat. She fell, choking, and the Duke's foot came down on her knife hand with a crunch. Sui, his voice was tight, controlled, dangerous. Where are you hurt? Shoulder. Sui's voice came out slurred. Poison. Not bad. I think. The Duke's eyes went to the wound. The tiny pinprick already swelling, already turning an ugly purple. He turned to the assassin. His face was blank. His voice was quiet. Who sent you? The assassin spat at him. Feng Shuyan knelt. He put his hand on her chest, over her heart, and pushed. His spiritual energy, dark, cold, enormous, flooded into her body. Not to heal, to hurt. The poison, he said. What is it? What's the antidote? The assassin screamed. Her body arched. Her eyes rolled back. The Empress, she gasped. No, antidote. Just time. If he survives an hour, he lives. The Duke's hand tightened. The assassin screamed again. Feng Shuyan. Sui's voice was weak but steady. Stop. She's told you what you need. The Duke didn't move. Feng Shuyan. Sui forced himself upright, ignoring the fire in his shoulder. The stew is burning. I need you to stir it. The Duke's head turned. His eyes were wild. The old madness, the one Su he had spent a month taming. But behind the madness was something else. Something that looked at Su He, at the blood on his robes, at the smile he was forcing onto his face. I'm fine, Sui said, annoyed but fine. Now stir the damn stew before I have to get up and do it myself. The Duke's hand released the assassin. She crumpled, sobbing. He crossed the stove, stirred the stew. His back was straight, his movements precise, but Suhi could see the tremor in his hands. You took a needle for our child, the Duke said quietly. I took a needle for me. The cub is attached. It's the same thing. You could have died. I didn't. Suhi slid down to sit on the floor, his back against the cabinets. His shoulder was on fire. His vision was swimming. And you're going to make sure I don't, right? The Duke turned. He looked at Suhi, at the poison spreading through his veins, at the smile that was becoming more of a grimace, at the hand pressed protectively over his belly. Right, he said. He crossed to Suhi, knelt beside him, and pressed his palm to the wound. His spiritual energy flowed, not cold this time, but warm, gentle. The poison hissed and retreated. You yelled at me, the Duke said as he worked. You told me to stir the stew. That means you care. Suhi laughed, then winced as the movement jostled his shoulder. It means I didn't want the stew to burn. You could have asked me to find an antidote. You could have asked me to kill her. Instead, you asked me to cook. The stew was more important. The Duke's hand stilled. He looked up, and his eyes were soft, devastatingly soft. You're going to be the death of me, he said. Probably, Suhi agreed. Now finish healing me, so I can finish dinner. The Duke shook his head, but he was smiling. And when the poison was gone, and the stew was saved and the assassin had been dragged away by guards, he sat on the kitchen floor beside Suhi and let his shoulder bump against Suhi's. The cub kicked, warm and content. He stayed, the kick said. He always stays. So he closed his eyes and leaned into the warmth. Chapter 6. The Birth of the Tandem. The labor began in the middle of a coup. Of course it did. Sui's life had never been simple, and his body had apparently decided that giving birth during a political crisis was the perfect time to remind him of that fact. The first contraction hit as he was chopping carrots. He dropped the knife, grabbed the counter, breathed through the wave of pain that rolled from his lower back to his belly. Suhi, Feng Shuyan, was at his side instantly, his hand on Suhi's elbow. What's wrong? Nothing, Suhi said through gritted teeth. Everything's fine. The carrots are fine. I'm fine. Another contraction. Harder. He doubled over, and the Duke caught him. You're not fine, Feng Shuyan said. His voice was calm, but his eyes were wide. You're... The baby, Suhi gasped. The baby is coming. Now, Feng Shuyan. The Duke's face went pale, then resolute. I'll get the midwife. No time. Suhi grabbed his collar. You're it. You're all I have. Don't you dare leave me. Outside, there were screams. The clash of swords. The Empress Dowager's forces had chosen this moment. The moment when the Duke was distracted, when Suhi was vulnerable, to make their move. Feng Shuyan looked at the door, looked at Suhi, looked at the door again. Then he lifted Suhi into his arms, gently, carefully, like he was something precious, and carried him to the bed. I'm here, he said. I'm not going anywhere. The next 3 hours were the longest of Soo-hee's life. The contractions came faster, harder, each one a wave of fire that crashed over him and left him gasping. The Duke held his hand through every one, his grip steady, his voice low and calm. "Breathe," he said. "You're doing well. Breathe." "Shut up," Soo-hee snarled. "You try pushing a watermelon through a—" Another contraction stole his words. Outside, the sounds of battle grew closer. The Empress Dowager's forces had breached the outer walls. The Duke's soldiers were fighting retreat. Someone was screaming orders: retreat, regroup, protect the Duke. Feng Shuyan didn't move. "Your men need you," Soo-hee gasped. "My men can handle themselves." The Duke wiped sweat from Soo-hee's forehead with a cool cloth. "You need me more." "I don't," contraction. "Need," contraction. "Anyone." The Duke smiled. It was a small thing, barely there, but it transformed his face, made him look almost human. "I know," he said, "but I need you. So you're going to survive this. You're going to push this baby out, and then you're going to yell at me for something trivial, and I'm going to pretend to be annoyed, and we're going to do this whole thing again in a year or two." Soo-hee laughed despite himself. "You want more children? I want whatever you want." The Duke's thumb traced circles on the back of Soo-hee's hand. "If you want one child, I'll give you one. If you want 10, I'll give you 10. If you want none, I'm literally in labor right now. Then I'll be grateful for the one we have." The Duke's voice softened. "I'll be grateful for you, for as long as you'll have me." Soo-hee's eyes stung. He blamed the pain. "Push," the Duke said. "I can see the head. Push now." Soo-hee pushed. The baby came into the world screaming. Not crying, screaming. A furious, indignant wail that seemed to shake the very walls. The sound was so loud, so present, that the fighting outside actually paused for a moment. Feng Shuyan caught the baby in hands that were steady despite everything. His face, when he looked down at the tiny, squirming creature, was something Soo-hee had never seen before. Awe, wonder, terror, love. "It's a boy," the Duke said, his voice cracking. "Soo-hee, it's a boy. Let me see." Soo-hee reached for the baby, and the Duke placed him on his chest. His cub, was small and red and wrinkled and absolutely perfect. Silver hair, the same shade as Soo-hee's own. A tiny face that was already trying to frown. Just like his father, Soo-hee thought. But something was wrong. The baby wasn't breathing. One moment he was screaming. The next the scream stopped. His tiny chest went still. His face went slack. "No!" Soo-hee shook him gently. "No, no, no, breathe." The Duke took the baby from him, pressed him to his own chest, closed his eyes. "Your mother made you juke," Feng Shuyan whispered. "He spent hours over that stove, stirring the pot, making sure it was perfect. He's going to feed it to you when this is over. But first, you have to wake up." The baby didn't move. Soo-hee's heart stopped, and then a pulse. Small, faint, barely there. A flicker of mental energy, warm and curious and alive. The cub's eyes opened. They were mismatched, one gold, one silver. Sentinel and guide together in one body. A tandem. The wave of spiritual energy that burst from the baby was unlike anything Soo-hee had ever felt. It wasn't healing exactly. It was balancing. The sharp edges of the Duke's mental sea smoothed out. The chaos of the battle outside quieted. Even the Empress Dowager's soldiers, mid-strike, found their weapons falling from suddenly peaceful hands. The baby cooed. Soo-hee burst into tears. The battle ended within the hour. The Empress Dowager's forces, disoriented by the wave of peace, surrendered en masse. The Dowager herself was found in her tent, weeping, unable to explain why she had suddenly lost all desire for power. The Duke's soldiers took her into custody without a single death. Feng Shuyan didn't care about any of it. He sat on the bed beside Soo-hee, the baby cradled in his arms, and didn't look away from either of them. "We need to name him," Soo-hee said. His voice was hoarse from screaming. His body was exhausted, but his heart was full. "Feng," and the Duke said, "Peace," because that's what he brought. Soo-hee smiled. "Feng and little Bun." He reached out and touched the baby's cheek. "Welcome to the world, little one. It's messy and dangerous and full of idiots. But your father and I will keep you safe." The baby opened his mismatched eyes and looked at Soo-hee with something that might have been recognition. Then he yawned and went to sleep. The Duke laughed. It was a real laugh, full and warm, and Suhi wanted to bottle the sound and keep it forever. We should probably deal with the coup, Suhi said. Probably. The Duke didn't move. The Empress Dowager is in custody. Yes. People are going to want to talk to you. About the future. About the throne. Feng Shiyan looked up. His eyes were gray and gold, steady and calm. I have a kitchen to tend to, he said. The throne can find someone else. Suhi stared at him. At the most powerful man in the empire, holding their newborn son, choosing a stove over a crown. You're insane, Suhi said. Probably. The Duke smiled. But I'm your insane. If you'll have me. Suhi didn't answer. He just leaned over, carefully because everything hurt, and kissed the Duke's cheek. The baby kicked in his sleep. About time, the kick seemed to say. Epilogue. The Feast of Forever. 5 years later. The restaurant had no sign. It sat on a quiet corner of the capital, tucked between a tea house and a bookshop, with a simple wooden door and a single window that faced the street. There was no menu, no prices, no hours posted, but everyone knew when it was open. The smell told them. Rice, garlic, chili, ginger. The scent of something simmering, something alive, drifted through the neighborhood every morning and didn't fade until the last customer had been fed. The wait list was 3 years long. Sue didn't care. He cooked what he wanted when he wanted. If someone complained, they were welcome to eat elsewhere. No one ever complained. Baba, Dad burned the rice again. So he looked up from his chopping board. Feng In, 5 years old, silver-haired, mismatched-eyed, and absolutely feral, came barreling into the kitchen with a look of righteous indignation. He did it on purpose and announced. He said it was experimental. But it's black, Baba. Black. Suhi sighed. Feng Shiyan. A sheepish face appeared in the kitchen doorway. The Duke, still beautiful, still terrifying, still utterly devoted, held a smoking pot in his hands. It was supposed to be crispy, he said. It's charcoal. Crunchy charcoal. Suhi pinched the bridge of his nose. Get out of my kitchen. Both of you. And giggled. The Duke set down the pot and came to stand behind Suhi, his hands settling on Suhi's waist. We could order takeout, he murmured against Suhi's ear. We own a restaurant. Technically, you own a restaurant. I just wash vegetables. You burn vegetables. There's a difference. But Suhi leaned back into the Duke's chest, just for a moment. Fine. Takeout. But you're explaining to the customers why we're closed. The Duke's arms tightened around him. Worth it. I made a gagging noise. You're being gross again. Go set the table, Suhi said, and wash your hands. You've been playing in the garden. I was training. And puffed out his small chest. I made the flowers dance. The flowers don't need to dance. The flowers wanted to dance. Suhi watched his son scamper off, trailing a faint shimmer of spiritual energy, tandem energy, the kind that made flowers dance, and enemies weep, and everyone who met him fall a little bit in love. He's going to be trouble, Suhi said. He's going to be magnificent, the Duke corrected. Like his mother. I'm his father. You're his Baba. I'm his dad. We've had this conversation. Suhi turned in the Duke's arms. 5 years. 5 years of waking up next to this impossible man, of cooking beside him, of raising their impossible son together. 5 years of peace, of fullness, of home. I never thanked you, Suhi said. The Duke's brow furrowed. For what? For staying. That first night, when you sat on my floor like a lost dog and refused to leave. Suhi reached up and touched the Duke's face. The sharp cheekbones, the strong jaw, the lips that had learned to smile. I wanted to be alone. I wanted to be left alone. But you wouldn't let me. The Duke covered Suhi's hand with his own. You gave me taste, he said. Not just food, life. You gave me a reason to wake up in the morning. You gave me a son who yells at me for burning rice. Suhi laughed. He gets that from you. The Duke shook his head. No, he gets that from the person who taught me that being broken isn't the end. It's just an ingredient. They kissed. Soft, familiar, warm. Over the steam of a cooling pot. Over the sounds of their son setting the table. Over the quiet hum of a kitchen that had become a home. I made a loud, retching noise from the doorway. Gross, he said. Go wash your hands, Suhi said without pulling away from the Duke. I washed them already. washed them again, and huffed and stomped off. The Duke laughed against Suhi's lips. "We should probably feed him," he said. Soon, Suhi rested his forehead against the Duke's. Just a moment longer. Outside, the capital carried on its noisy, hungry, beautiful way. Carriages rattled past. Merchants shouted their wares. Somewhere a child was laughing, and somewhere else a sentinel was screaming, and somewhere else still a guide was reaching out to help. But in this kitchen, there was only the sound of 3 heartbeats, steady as a simmer, warm as a flame, infinite as a well-made soup. So he thought about the apocalypse, about the years of exhaustion, of obligation, of being everyone's savior and no one's person. He thought about the novel he'd read during a boring night shift, never imagining that its world would become his own. He thought about a broken Duke on a dirty floor, reaching for a bowl of cold congee like it was salvation. And he thought about a small, silver-haired boy with mismatched eyes, who made flowers dance and rice burn, and everyone who met him fall a little bit in love. "I'm glad I transmigrated," Suhi said. The Duke kissed his forehead. "I'm glad you did too, even though I'm lazy, especially because you're lazy. You forced me to do all the work. I forced you to wash vegetables. There's a difference." "Is there?" Anne's voice echoed from the dining room. "Ali Baba, Dad, the food is getting cold." Suhi and the Duke exchanged a look. The same look they'd exchanged 1,000 times over 5 years. The look that said, "Our son is ridiculous. Our son is perfect. Our son is ours." "Coming," Suhi called. He took the Duke's hand. They walked out of the kitchen together, into the small dining room where their son sat impatiently at a table set for 3. The food was simple. Rice, soup, a few side dishes. Nothing fancy. Just a meal, made with care, shared with love. It was, Suhi thought, the best thing he'd ever cooked. That night, after he was asleep and the dishes were washed and the kitchen was dark, Suhi stood at the window and looked out at the city. Feng Shuyin came up behind him, wrapped his arms around his waist, and rested his chin on Suhi's shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. Suhi was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled. "I'm thinking," he said, "that I transmigrated into a trash novel. I was supposed to be a villain. I was supposed to die alone, unloved, unmourned." He turned in the Duke's arms and looked up at him, at this man who had been a beast, who had become a partner, who had somehow become everything. Instead, Suhi said, "I cooked myself a home." The Duke kissed him, soft, sweet, like the first taste of something new. "Best meal I ever had," he said. And in the kitchen, the stove hummed, warm and waiting for tomorrow. Special chapter. Feng Shuyin attempted to cook alone for the first time on a Tuesday. So he had taken into the market. The Duke had the kitchen to himself. He had a recipe. He had ingredients. He had confidence. Within 10 minutes, he had set the fire suppressant array on fire. Within 20, the smoke alarm was screaming. Within 30, Suhi had returned, taken one look at the chaos, and banished the Duke to sleeping on the couch. That night, Feng Shuyin lay on the too small sofa, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of his family sleeping in the next room. At some point, he wasn't sure when, the door creaked open. Small footsteps padded across the floor. A tiny body climbed onto the couch and burrowed against his chest. "Dad," and whispered, "Baba says you're in trouble." "I know, but I think you're not." Anne's mismatched eyes glowed in the dark. "I think you tried your best. And Baba is just grumpy because he loves you." The Duke's throat tightened. "Go back to bed, little one. Only if you come too." "I can't. I'm banished. And consider this." Then he wriggled off the couch, took the Duke's hand, and tugged. "Come on," he said. "Baba is asleep. He won't know." The Duke let himself be led, and pushed open the bedroom door. So he was curled on his side, one hand on his belly, pregnant again, with twins this time, breathing soft and slow, and climbed onto the bed and patted the empty space beside Suhi. The Duke hesitated. Then he lay down. Suhi stirred. His eyes opened just a crack. "I thought I banished you," he mumbled. "I was banished and mutinied." Suhi looked at their son, who was already asleep, one hand clutching the Duke's sleeve. He looked at the Duke, who was watching him with eyes full of everything he couldn't say. Idiots, Suhi whispered. My idiots. He threw an arm over both of them and went back to sleep. The Duke smiled in the dark. Outside, the city slept. Inside, a kitchen waited for morning. And a family, broken and healed and broken again and healed again, held each other through the night. This, feng shui in thought, is what taste really means. And for the first time in his life, he was full.